Hi, everybody. I am Karen with BillTrack50, and we also have here Michael
Good morning.
and Sarah.
Good morning.
And thank you very much for making a little time to come talk with us about legislation. We were inspired by some posts that Sarah's been working on called Slices of Life, which are always available on our blog. They have their own section and everything. Looking at the bills that get read the most in each month, which was turned out to be really interesting. So we did a whole wrap up at Slice of Life, and by we I mean Sarah, to look at what bills were most popular over the year, and that got us to talking about what might be popular next year. And so Michael thought that that would be fun to tackle. So this webinar is to look back at 2017 and what bills were most popular. And in particular, that means what bills were clicked on the most often on BillTrack50. So it's kind of like what the public was coming in to search for. And then when we're looking forward, we're going to be looking at what we think the states are going to be working on the most, what topics will produce the most legislation and the most interesting legislation. And probably a lot of the same topics that were popular in BillTrack50 last year will be popular again. And you'll see what I mean as we work through these. So I am going to have Sarah talk a little bit about the most popular bills from this year on BillTrack50. And starting with the very most popular, we had New York 2950. Sarah, what do you know about this bill?
So New York 2950 was popular pretty much the whole entire year. As you can see from the read count, it's been read over 43,000 times. And it just related to early voting and when residents can vote and how they can be permitted to vote early. And I think it's up to 8 days before the election. And we just saw a lot of legislation trending around voting this year, especially with absentee and early voting because of all of the news surrounding that.
And I was also really encouraged to see how much traffic our website got looking at specific legislators, people looking up how their representatives voted. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Karen, I'd like to point out I love New York because they love to reintroduce bills every single year. And this bill was recommitted again. But this bill is interesting because it has one of the legislative tricks that you sometimes see in legislation that legislators like to pass to give themselves points, but that makes it absolutely irrelevant to state law, is that the enacting clause was stricken at some point last week. And that means that this bill, even if they pass it, will never become state law. So they'll pass the concept of it, but the contents of the law will never actually become state law.
Thank you for pointing that out, Michael. Good to know. But also, this bill is really important to people, so it's too bad they're doing that. Although I don't know if the people looking at it like it or hate it, so there is that. All right, Sarah, next most popular bill was the Healthy California Act.
So this bill was also really popular this year, along with other healthcare legislation. And the Healthy California Act pretty much gives California single-payer health care. And, and so obviously we've been hearing a lot about that in the news. It was the universal single health payer system coverage that could have a cost control for benefits. And it would also include undocumented residents. And the bill was passed, but then it was tabled because there wasn't really a particular item list published to pay for the estimated $4 billion price tag.
Just that.
Yeah, the lack of precise details had it.
As my friend Jennifer Briney would say, billion. Right, so it got out of the Senate and then it wound up in the Assembly and it was held, as you said. So what kinds of other things did you see around health this year?
Yeah, there was a ton trending around health. There was a lot of stuff covering equal access to information. There was stuff surrounding being able to help fund for debt. There was also the Medicare for All bill by Bernie Sanders that I think over a third of the congressmen supported with him. But just a lot of conversations surrounding universal health care and whether it's a right or a privilege, and kind of what states are going to do around that.
I assume that Michael is going to propose that health will be another big topic next year. Not to steal your thunder, spoiler alert, everybody cares about healthcare. All right, and then the third most trafficked bill on our website was people coming to read Arkansas HB 1032. Tell us about this bill.
Yeah, so this bill was proposed by Arkansas, obviously, and it is to ban dismemberment abortions, which are also known as the only abortion that women can receive after 20 weeks. And it's the only safe way for women to have an abortion that late. And usually women who do have abortions that late, it's for a medical reason. And so this bill did a few different things. Firstly, it banned those abortions, and then it also made the D&E procedures a felony punishable by $10,000 or 6 years in prison. And the second part of it was it allows women to be barred from having an abortion by their spouse or family member, even in cases of spousal rape or incest.
Yes, and so that, to me, is what made the news and got it on Facebook and had a lot of people all really quite passionate about this bill, one way or the other. So, looks like it was passed, and I think there was a lot of other traffic around abortion as well, right? Like lots of bills, lots of people coming, bills in their states, right?
Yeah.
Right.
We had two other bills gained a lot of attraction this year, which one was no taxpayer funding for abortion and Abortion Insurance Full Disclosure Act, which was just to aim at making insurance money not be able to pay for abortions, which it usually doesn't anyways. And then Rhode Island had the Reproductive Health Care Act, which aimed to prohibit the state from interfering in a woman's decision to commence, continue, or terminate a pregnancy prior to fetal viability.
Oh, you said commence? That's interesting. So start. All right. So back to your blog post. I know that you were pretty interested in kind of the impact of President Trump on BillTrack50 traffic.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of the trending bills throughout the year kind of followed the news and a lot of stuff of what Trump was doing. And so, we could see spikes in marijuana policy when things would come around with sessions. We would see spikes in bills as the three that are listed on the page right now. So the Presidential Conflicts of Interest Act was trending a lot the first few months of the year when we were all reading about the suits that were being filed, and we all
learning the world of emoluments. Yeah.
With what the emoluments clause was. And then, this whole entire year we've been talking about North Korea. So restricting first use nuclear weapons has gone in and out of trending throughout the year. And, that was just for first strike policy is stating that the president can launch a nuclear strike without it being a retaliatory strike. And there's really no protection set up for that. So it's actually quite a scary way that it's set up right now. So that goes in and out of trending along with the Foreign Agents Registration, Modernization, and Enforcement Act, which is another act that's aimed at helping the U.S. not become victim again of election hacking and interference and things like that. And so we've seen that one go in and out along with the news throughout the year as well.
So to take a break from the bills and to go a little bit meta, I made a quick graph to show our traffic. So this is normal BillTrack50 traffic, and then this was the election, the day before the election. So BillTrack50 had a huge spike of people coming to look stuff up. before the election last year. But then this year, you can see our traffic is actually way up. This was the election, which included the election for the Virginia State House. And then you can see our traffic is way, way up. So apparently, the interest that was generated here has really maintained and even increased in the coming year, which is pretty interesting. That people have like stayed interested. All right, so other big trends you had in your blog post, marijuana. This is a map of where there's marijuana bills currently alive, and you can see Colorado, Washington, California obviously have lots, but really all the states are working on marijuana in some way or another, which is pretty interesting. Did you see any particular trends with like what they were doing in particular?
Yeah, there was a lot of really interesting stuff about marijuana this year. I usually write about it every year, and it's been interesting to see how the policy has evolved over the last few years. And this year, I saw a lot more policy that had to do with actually incorporating cannabis into our lifestyle, and less of the sexy legalization for recreational pot that we all kind of think of when we think of marijuana policy. So two really interesting bills were one in Nebraska and one in Wyoming that both proposed bills to help farm with hemp. And there's a lot of studies out there that hemp is a lot better for the environment. You can make fiber, paper, cardboard. There's plastic substitutes. There's soy substitutes. There's a lot of different areas that hemp can go in. And so they both, Wyoming actually passed their law, and Nebraska carried theirs over. But just to have studying and farming with universities in the state to see where they could go with the hemp farming. And some farmers in Wyoming were quoted in this article saying it's a huge boost for the agriculture as well as farmers and landowners. So, kind of incorporating marijuana more into our life than just people smoking it to get high. And
I feel like that's another one that Michael's gonna talk to us about, right, Michael?
Yep.
Marijuana.
And
I talk.
In the economy, it's hot.
Also,
Sorry,
Iowa also proposed one that legalizes cannabinoid oils, and so those are CBDs, and those can be used to treat seizures and other types of things, and don't get you as high. So those were really cool. And then California proposed AB 420, which allows business credit and expenses for marijuana related, which is interesting because they just passed. So yeah, it was really interesting.
I tweeted that because I noticed the bill number. All right, so that is, well, let's zip through a couple other things that we were going to talk about, but very briefly because we're about halfway through and it's time to look to the future. So you also talked about LGBT issues. Just give us the highlights.
Yeah, so it's a lot of what we've seen in the past. There's still a lot of fighting around transgender rights and their right to exist and what that looks like in schools and in public spaces. Colorado is still fighting their issue with the quote-unquote right to disagree. The Baker case is still alive and in the Supreme Court. And then the United States proposed the Equity Act, which would add sexual orientation and gender identity to prohibited categories of discrimination. And then Massachusetts proposed a bill that was trending for a while that banned conversion therapy for anyone that is involved in a youth LGBTQ person's life in the medical field. So
yeah. And then again, the way these came to our attention was because a lot of people were reading them, which really helped us kind of keep track of what was really dramatic. Okay, and then I think immigration was the last one we were going to talk about.
Yeah, and so legislation, again, reflected the news. There was a lot of legislation surrounding sanctuary cities, especially in Virginia. A lot of people were reading their sanctuary city bill in lieu of their gubernatorial election. And then the Protect and Grow American Jobs Act had to do with 1B visas, and then finally the DREAM Act of 2017, which we are all very familiar about the fight about DACA, and the DREAM Act is what they're hoping to pass to protect the people who have DACA status.
So very timely for right this week with them pass a budget, which maybe Michael can address. So I would like to take a second to highlight one of my favorite calendars. So this is the NCSL website, and they have a really nice map to show what states are in session, which are not, which are in a special session, etc. So these states light up as they begin their sessions. You can click on a state, and it shows you down here when it starts and when it's supposed to finish. And then it'll list special sessions and other things. This is a really, really great map. So if you Google NCSL and calendar, you'll surely find this site, and I think you'll find it really helpful. I've got it bookmarked. I like it so much. Which moves us nicely into the states are getting back to work. So let me bring our little document back up. This is the pass that we were talking about, and here's a quick peek at what Michael's going to address for us. So Michael, what do you think is going to be on the agenda for the coming year?
Great, and it's great to start this off as states are starting up. This is the slow year of most two-year sessions. Next year, 48 states start a new session. So this year is the slower of two legislative sessions. But legislative trends will continue to follow some big picture pieces that they tend to follow every year, and that's the budget and the big pieces that drive budget: healthcare, education, infrastructure, energy, economic development, and corrections. And we'll talk a little bit about the budget and a few of those issues, and then an issue or two, if we have time, that aren't necessarily in those big drivers. Starting with the budget, the HR1 that recently passed is going to impact every single state. We think in the beginning it's going to impact states positively in terms of revenue. I think revenue projections are up because deductions at the federal level have been wiped out. So your tax rates in your take-home pay might be lower, but the tax returns and refunds that you may have been used to in the past are also going to be lower, and that's because the deductions are lower. So states are going to see increased budgets because of that. Now, because of those deductions being wiped out, a lot of states are also going to be dealing throughout the year with repairing those. There's a lot of state and local deductions that states now have to deal with, whether that means refunding citizens for taxes that they paid, or whether that's making state localities and different agencies whole again. So expect to see revenues up, but expect to see tax legislation happen in every state throughout the year based totally on the impacts from HR1. Healthcare.
That's really interesting to see how that unrolls.
It definitely will be interesting. I think it's interesting from both the federal level, because we don't know what that impact is really going to be yet, and to tweak state law while still in that experimental phase and not knowing exactly how it's going to impact. It will be interesting this year, and really interesting to see the impacts of it come January of 2019.
Mm-hmm. And I've been hearing on podcasts people talking about the kind of tax loophole games that states are going to play. That's more like how a person would normally like reclassify themselves as a business and that kind of thing, to try to still function under the new tax law. So it's going to be just interesting to see what myriad ideas are developed. Love it. All right, what's our next trend that we expect?
Healthcare has taken over as the single largest budget item in most states, if not all states, by this time. And Medicaid is going to be the single biggest healthcare issue. 2019, January 2019, will end the Medicaid expansion solely funded by the federal government. And so this year, states, because states like to do everything at the last minute, states will be dealing with, whether or not they will continue expansion, how will they pay for expansion now that they have to pay for it. I think even in Virginia, they're going to try to decide whether or not it's still worthwhile to expand Medicaid, even with it not being 100% federally funded. So Medicaid is going to be a huge issue. Expect those same arguments of expansion or not to happen in nearly every state. States, even with revenues being up, revenues they expect to be up 2.5%, 3%. State budgets are already up 3 to 3.5%. So where is that money going to come from?
Right.
The second biggest issue, and it's due to inaction at the federal level, CHIP funding, or state child health insurance program. It almost got wiped out at the end of last year. It's been extended at least temporarily through March. States, especially if you're in a short session and don't know what's going to happen beyond March, states are going to have to look at possible outcome or possible planning that will have to happen to fund those CHIP programs if it is not extended. I do expect it to be extended at least through the end of the fiscal year. But I've been wrong before. So states could be looking at eating up big chunks of session to CHIP, or maybe even having to be called back if that extension does not happen.
So you could imagine them convening special sessions to try to deal with whatever happens with.
Yeah, if they're out and the extension does not go through, they're going to have to come back and deal with it.
Got it. All right.
Most of them, even if they plan for it to happen, won't have legislation and budget done to actually take care of it. I think most of them will be optimistic and bet that it'll be expanded or extended.
So healthcare remains chaotic.
And the next biggest piece in healthcare, another piece that's driving those healthcare costs, are the opioid crisis. I think last year, the year before, and again this year, opioids, one of the biggest healthcare topics that's happening, and that's dealing with prescription monitoring programs, that's dealing with drug courts, that's dealing with moving people to treatment, and how do you fund those treatment programs, especially given the confusion with the federal funding programs. Again, those three reasons are going to make healthcare probably the single biggest issue beyond budget that you're going to see in 2018.
All right, so that's 2 out of 3 of our big 3 for what the states are always talking about. And I believe the third was infrastructure.
Infrastructure, I think, and infrastructure this year, I don't think we're going to be talking a lot about roads and bridges, although roads and bridges will be huge topics, especially if the federal government does indeed pass some kind of infrastructure bill early this year. But you're going to be seeing drones and driverless cars and cybersecurity. Several states have been passing drone legislation and driverless car legislation for the last couple of years. But on the driverless car side, you're seeing the technology kind of come out where it's no longer in the testing phase, but people are actually have these cars on the road. And so what's the legislative and the regulatory framework to make that happen? I don't think you want to be the last state to pass a law allowing driverless cars, because I think that's going to be a significant impact to your economy.
But there's definitely things to figure out. So this is going to be another super interesting one during the year to see which states get it and which don't, and also to see what good ideas come, because there's things to figure out, right?
There's definitely things
and all kinds of things.
You're going to see a lot of good ideas. I think states will be, stealing those good ideas from each other. I think you're going to see a lot of model, not necessarily model legislation from an industry standpoint, but a lot of sharing. I think NCSL will have, and the Council of State Governments will have a lot of model legislation come through. I think cybersecurity, different issues with privacy concerns are going to be big. I know we're running out of time, so on the economic development side,
marijuana again.
Marijuana. I think you're going to see a lot of states building an industry in those few states where it's legal. I also think you're going to see for the first time, and possibly for the second time, you're going to see a state legislature actually pass adult use or recreational marijuana. My guess is
you mean from the legislature instead of as a ballot initiative from the people?
That's correct.
And where's that going to happen?
If I had to guess, I'd guess Vermont. There's a few other bills already out there that would allow this. Delaware and New Hampshire have legislation that would put them to the forefront, and I know Maine and Massachusetts have adult use coming online later this year. And
so does that affect, if it's passed from the legislators instead of from the people, does that affect how seriously the federal government considers it? Is that better or worse, or is that not the issue when we're looking at the federal government versus the states on this topic?
I believe the Attorney General was very sincere in his belief that good people don't smoke marijuana.
Yes.
So I don't think it's going to change the federal government stance. I think you might see Congress take action at some point on both the marijuana side and probably before that the hemp side, as there's really no hallucinogenic quality to hemp. I think you'll see hemp pass first.
Yeah. And like Sarah was saying, that's another economic development item. All right.
I mean, you're creating new industries. I mean, just look at California with the state deductions. But however, on the other side, you had Massachusetts recently. As an industry, they've stopped. They've moved back to a cash industry in fear of what's going to happen at the federal level. And lastly, one thing that's not kind of in those big economic drivers for states, I think you're going to see a lot of states kind of tackle the Me Too issue within their own bodies. Sadly, state legislatures have not been immune to the Me Too issue and sexual harassment. I know Maryland has already kind of put forth its framework as to what it's going to do within its own body to handle sexual harassment and sexual assault issues. I think you're going to see every state at a bare minimum take a look at what their policy is, and I think you're going to see a good number of them kind of take those steps, whether that's through legislation or through rules in their bodies to address sexual harassment issues.
So in Colorado, a bunch of the legislators wore black to the first day of session, much like the Golden Globes, which was interesting. So besides just actual legislation, I think it's just going to have a big impact on public perception, right, of our legislatures.
I hope so. I have a number of lobbyist friends who have made it clear that it's been an issue for years with state legislators, and hopefully this is a year where we can kind of end that, because it's discourages people from entering the government relations and lobbying fields, and it's certainly not the kind of behavior you want to see from your legislators.
And we know we're going to see a lot of women running this year. So that's interesting. So we skipped very quickly over education. We skipped it completely because it's always education. And then we did talk about marijuana. So let me pull this agenda back up to remind you what we've talked about. And I would be happy to entertain any questions for Sarah or for Michael. What would you like to chat about as far as what might happen this year? And you can type questions into the little question pane if you've got that on your dashboard, or you can chat them to me in the chat pane. Either way, I've got them both up, and I'm happy to take any questions. And while we're letting you type, Sarah, interesting to see how many of our current the issues from 2017 are kind of come forward, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it has been really interesting to watch all of them really follow. I mean, usually I write about things that are in the news, but this year it's been easy topics because everyone was so engaged and so active this year. It's been really interesting to watch the legislation and how it moves about throughout the year and how people are.
It's amazing to see lots of people looking at state bills. That's just not anything we ever would have thought. All right. So as far as questions, question coming in from the audience. Thank you, audience. Any uptick in gerrymandering issues lately? We talked a little bit about election stuff, but we didn't talk about gerrymandering. It's certainly been in the news, and it's in the Supreme Court right now. So is that a judicial branch issue at this point? Again, reading the question. Or are we going to see legislation around that? What do you think, Michael?
It can certainly happen in both places. I know there's a number of states that have gone to a third-party election line drawing piece instead of having it happen within the legislature. And I think the spirit of people is in that place. I don't know if the spirit of the legislative leadership is in that place. So I'd like to see more of it happen. I know there's a push with the national groups to make that happen. So it'll be interesting. I don't know if kind of the Russia and the hacking piece is going to impact that, although I think that will negatively impact states moving forward with election technology. I think, I know Virginia's already moved back to paper ballots. I think you'll see states move back in that direction, which to me, it's always sad when you're moving backwards technologically. But gerrymandering, I think there's a want for it, but it's hard to say where it's going to happen. And I'd have to review which states have those third-party commissions, kind of give a better guideline of where it might happen next.
538 just did a great podcast series about the different ways different states are trying to address gerrymandering, and it's really fascinating. And in particular, California with their third-party, their non-political attempt to say, well, we're not going to look at party or anything. We're going to look at communities and have it not be the politicians who set it up, which was interesting. And so I really recommend that podcast to anyone who's interested in learning about what the options are for gerrymandering and also what some of the challenges are going to be. All right. So any other questions? If not, we are going to go ahead and wrap this up. All right. Thank you very much for attending. I hope you found something in here that was interesting and enjoyed looking back at the year that was with us. We had fun putting it together. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting year. As you can tell, there's a lot of crazy topics coming up. So we look forward to following it all with you here on BillTrack50. Thanks a lot. Say goodbye, Michael and Sarah.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.